Okay, so my friends, Boker Tov, today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos 88. Yevamos 88, but we're going to start, Yevamos Pechas, we're going to start on the bottom of 87b, right where it says Gemara. The Gemara has said two scenarios. In the first scenario, it says that a woman whose husband comes from overseas is the woman who remarried because they said her husband who was overseas has died, and then her first husband returned. In that scenario, that the Gemara starts with, it says that the Mishnah starts with, it says she has to leave both husbands. But in the second scenario, where she remarried with Rishus Bezdin, she married her second husband without the Rishus Bezdin, then it says she can return. She doesn't have to leave both.
How is she without the Rishus?
So what we had said yesterday, when she remarried without Rishut Bezin, it's a case where it was such a clear ruling, that it was such a clear scenario that the court doesn't even need to rule. The Gemara is going to ask about this exactly right now, Daniel. The Gemara is going to ask about that right now. So the Gemara says, Mitikatani Seifa, from the fact that the second clause of the Mishnah states, Nisei Shelo B'Rishus, that if she marries without the permission of the court, Muteras Lachsarlo, that she's allowed to return to her first husband if she remarried without a specific ruling of the court. That proves, what does that mean? It means she doesn't have the ruling of the court, but she had two witnesses. And that's why she's allowed to return to her first husband. Mikal, this proves the Reisha that in the first case when her first husband returns, she had remarried the second husband. It had been Bershus Bezdin. It had been with the permission of the court, Ube'ed Echad, and she had done it on the basis of one witness. So where does she have to leave both husbands? Where she remarried on the basis of one witness, but where she remarried on the basis of two witnesses, she can return to her first husband. So the Gemara, before it gets into the scenarios of how exactly she remarried and all that, first the Gemara wants to delve a little deeper into this concept that when there's one witness, you're able to trust one witness. Alma Eid Echad Neman. We see from here that one witness is believed, that one witness is trusted. What's the source for this? Tanan Nami. The source for this is Huchsaku Yos Mesian Mipi Eid Isha Mipi Isha Isha Mipi Evan Mipi Shifcha. It says there that the Mishnah states that we are allowed to believe them that they're married, to get married on the basis of one witness, from the one witness testifying on the basis of another witness, even a woman from a woman from a slave. We see from here Alma Eid Echad Mehemen, that one witness is trusted. And another source for it, Tanan Nami Eid Echad Omer Achal Tachelev. One witness comes along and says, you ate the non-kosher fat, the chelev. Chelev is non-kosher fat. Now the law is if you eat it intentionally, you have to bring kares, but if you ate it accidentally, you have to bring a chatas. So one witness comes along and says, you ate the chelev. V'hu omer, and the witness says, the defendant says, no, lo achalti. Says, I didn't eat anything. Pater. Then we're going to say he's exempt. But, says the Gemara, let's analyze this. Taima d'amar lo achalti. What's the reason why he's exempt? Is because he says, I didn't eat anything. He says, I didn't eat anything. That's why he's exempt. Ha'ishtik. But if he had been silent there, mehemin, we would have believed the one witness. So we see from here, Alma Eid Echad Mehemen Diarais. Alma Eid Echad Mehemen Midiaraisa. We see from here that biblically speaking, one witness is believed, because here to believe this witness is not just, oh, we believe him and so to be strict. No, you have to bring a sin offering, which means you have to bring an animal into the courtyard of the temple, and there's a prohibition to bring a non-sanctified animal into the courtyard of the temple. So we must be believing this witness even by a biblical law. So the Gemara asks Minoan, what's the source of this idea? How do we know that you can believe a one witness by biblical law? The Gemara says the source for it is based upon a brisa where it says, if he finds out about a sin offering, he has to bring the sin offering. Means to say, now even if others don't tell him, so I might think that even though he doesn't rebuke the witness, so what is this scenario? What does this brisa mean? The Gemara wants to know. Gemara says, what's the scenario of the brisa where he has to bring a sacrifice on the basis of testimony? Well, if we would say we're talking about a circumstance where two witnesses came and If you want to say we're talking about a circumstance where two witnesses came and said you ate the sin offering, and he doesn't refute them, well then kral emily. Well then, if that's the case, why does he need a verse? Obviously, if two witnesses come and say you did something wrong, you don't refute it. Of course, they're believed. So it must be elav chad. It must be that there's one witness. V'kilo kamachas le'mehemen. And where he doesn't rebuke, where he doesn't contradict the one witness, he's believed. Then the witness is believed. Shmamina eid echad ne'eman. We see from here that one witness is believed. Gemara says, "Nimai." How do we know that that's a scenario? The mishum de mehemen. How do we know that the reason why he has to bring the sin offering is because we believe the one witness? Dilma mishum de kashasek. Maybe the reason why he has to bring the sin offering is not because the one witness is believed, but because this man is silent under these circumstances. And we have a principle, shtika ko da'adami. Silence is like admission. I always decide, this is the one of the phrases from the Talmud that I find myself repeating over and over again. Silence is like admission. If a person makes an accusation against you, or if a person says something wrong and you're sitting around there and you're quiet and you're silent, silence is like admission. It's a very powerful phrase. Well, maybe the reason why we have to bring a sin offering here is not because the one witness is believed, but because he doesn't say anything. Shtika ko da'adami. And I'll prove it to you. I'll prove to you that that's the reason why we believe the witness, why he has to bring the sin offering. It's because he was silent, not because there's one witness. Tell you then, I'll prove it to you. The Katani Seifa, because what does the concluding clause say? Let's say in the first scenario, one witness came and he ate the chaylev and he was quiet, and therefore he has to bring a sin offering. In the second case of the brisa, it says two people came and say you ate the chaylev, and he says no, I ate nothing. So Potter, in this case, he's exempt. Yeah, Zach?
Practically speaking, why can't he refute two witnesses if just himself?
The Gemara is going to say it. The Gemara is going to ask that question right now. Good. Shkoyach. So if two people come and say you ate the chaylev and he says they didn't eat anything, he's exempt. Rabbi Meir Mechayev. Rabbi Meir says you're liable. So the Gemara says, let's analyze it. Why does Rabbi Meir say you're liable? I'm a Rabbi Meir, Kal v'chomer. Of course he's liable if two witnesses come. It may view shnayim l'dei nisa chamura lo yivyu l'dei karban kal. Two witnesses can put him to death. So of course they can make him bring an offering. Amrulo, so they said, the rabbis responded, they're responding to Rabbi Meir, they're also responding to Zachary. You see how the rabbis could speak 2,000 years ago and they could respond right now to Zachary. They knew what Zachary was, they knew what Reuven Zachari was going to ask. They said, Ma'am Yirtza Omar Mezid Hayisi. Because what are we talking about? We're talking about having to bring the sin offering. The sin offering is something if you did something accidentally. So what do we care what these two witnesses say? Because he could always say, I did it on purpose. And if he said I did it on purpose, then he wouldn't have to bring anything. So since if he wants to, Rashi calls this amigo. Since if he wants to, he could have said something better. He could have said I did it on purpose, and then I wouldn't have to bring anything. Therefore, in this scenario where he says I didn't do it at all, they also believe him. Tosfos challenges Rashi's explanation, but that's enough for the Daf Yomi for now. And that's why the Rabbanan say we believe him when he says I didn't do it. But your question is very sharp. So the Gemara says, well, Reisha my timer, going back to now 88a. Reisha my timer kamachayve Rabbanan. In a case, the first case, what was the first case of the bride? So the first case, whereas one witness came and said you ate the chaylev and he's quiet. There, ironically, on the basis of one witness, the rabbis say you have to bring a sin offering. Why? If you want to say it's because he's believed, in that case, if you want to say that why we believe the one witness, but when there's two people in general, the but I don't understand, say the rabbis, why in the case of one are you believing him? If there's two in general, if there's two people in general, that even though if two people come to testify in general and you reject them, they believe. And here in this case, when there's two, the rabbis say you're exempt. So why would the rabbis say you're liable on the basis of one witness? It must be mishum de ishtek. It must be the only reason why the rabbis say you're liable here is not because there's actually one witness, but because you're silent. It's like you admitted to this idea that you did a sin offering. Again, normally we would say a person cannot make himself a wicked person, but by doing a sin offering, it's not a wickedness. You're saying you did it accidentally, so we would accept your admission here. So we're back to the question, how do we know we believe one witness? So we say svarahi. It's logical. What's the logic here? Because it's like the case of what we call Let's say you have a piece of meat. Suffix shel chelav, you're not sure if it's kosher. Suffix shel shuman, you're not sure if it's not kosher. You're not sure if it's kosher. One witness comes along and says, "Barwi de shumanu." One witness comes along and says, "I'm 100% certain that it is a. I'm 100% certain that he is that it's kosher meat." There we would believe the witness. So just like we would believe the witness over there, and Rashi says this is the basis. If I go into your home, if I go into Rabbi Yitzchak's home and he says to me it's kosher, how do I believe him? Otherwise you can't operate. You have to trust. You have to have some basis of trust. So therefore, just so to here, one witness we believe it. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? There's such a big distinction between the cases. Midami, the cases are not at all similar. Hasam duo is chazik isura. That case of meat, we don't have meat that was established as being prohibited. Here, this case, the baseline is that this woman is prohibited. Why do we believe? Because she's married woman. Why do we believe one witness who comes along and says she's not married anymore? And on top of that, we have a concept when it comes to a prohibited relationship, you need at least two people to undo something. So that's not enough of a proof. So the Gemara says, "Oh, dummy, the case of the married woman, what she's actually more similar to have a piece of meat, if you have a piece of meat that was for sure non-kosher, and one witness comes along and says, barley, the shumanav, and says for sure it's kosher. The Roma that there we don't believe him. So the Gemara says, well, that's also not a good comparison. There's a distinction. Midami hasam afilu asubei me'olomami. There, if you have a certainty that this piece of meat is not kosher, and 100 people come along and say it is kosher, you still wouldn't believe it. So what's this case? No, our case here is since if two people would come and testify she's not married, we would believe them. So do we believe one? Why? And I'll tell you why. Says the Gemara, it's similar to the case of Tevel, Hektish, and Konamas. The Gemara is going to tell us what these cases are, but first we'll just give a little background. Tevel is produce that is untied. You haven't removed the truma and the meiser from it. So there it's called Tevel until you say you've released it. Hektish is something you consecrate to the temple, and you're not allowed to have benefit from it as long as it's consecrated. And Konamos is where you take an oath that you're not going to have benefit from something. You take an oath that you're giving something to the temple. So the Gemara says, "Hi Tevel echi dami." What's the scenario of Tevel where we would believe the one witness? Idi day. If you want to say it's my Tevel and I'm saying that I tied it, even though you thought it was untied. Well, the reason why we would believe him is not because we believe one witness, because there's a different concept. Mishum to be yado etachna. Because since you have it if you testify about something you have in your ability to do, we believe you. So it must be that it was the tevel of somebody else. Well, Micah Savar. What's the concept here why we believe the testimony? Well, if you say that if I want to take from my produce a tithe and have it be effective on your produce, meaning say I'm going to take your tithe for your produce from my produce, I'm going to tithe for you, and I don't need your consent in order to do that. Well, if that's the case, that's because of Mishum Tibiyado Ataknon. That's the reason. It's not because we believe one witness. That's because you have the ability to change it. And if you're saying it's because you do need the consent of the other owner, and if you say I know that this produce was tithed, he goofa me knowing. How do we know that idea that you believe him? So therefore, the Gemara says, what's the scenario going on here? And what about hektish? Hektish nami. What kind of consecrated property are we talking about? If you're going to say I just consecrated the money, well, mishum to be other of those. Well, if that's the case, because you have the ability to redeem the money and just give that money to the temple, and so you can fix it. And if you're saying no, he consecrated the sheep to the altar. Edi day, well, because if it's mine, mishum to be yadu, it's shuli. I could always annul the vow by going to a chacham. Now, the achar, if you think it's somebody else's, and you testify that it was not sanctified, because he could say Yodana beit itchal mariaway. He says, and I know that he asked that he annulled it. He grew from an same idea. How do we know that? We could believe him there. And konamos nami. And what about an oath? If we say that by an oath, if you misappropriate the property, it's considered trespassing on temple's property, kedushas damim nachtalahu, and it's sanctified with its value. Well, that's the same idea. Mishum debiyado ifto, so he has the ability to redeem it. Because and if you say there's no misappropriation by kanamos, the Easter ba'almo, and it's just a regular prohibition, the rakav lo akas, it's an expression that he has on his shoulders. Well, same concept. If it's his, he could know it. It's somebody else's. And he says, and I know that this person annulled his vow. He goofed him and so the Gemara is back to square one. How do we know? We believe one witness here who comes along and says that this woman's husband died and therefore she can remarry. What's the basis for believing the one witness? So Amar Rabbi Zera says, really there's no basis in the Torah. It's just logic. And what's the logic? Because the rabbis were strict about her at the end. What's the strictness at the end? That they make her leave both marriages if her first husband reappears. Therefore, they were lenient on her and allow her to remarry. Because Rashi says, because she's concerned, maybe this is going to mess me up, and she's not going to remarry until she checks properly. Rashi says, the rabbis were lenient about her in the beginning because they know she's going to check. Hold on one second. So the Gemara says, well, we don't need either one. Don't be strict and don't be lenient. Let her stay and don't be lenient in the beginning. Make her have two witnesses and don't be strict to kick her out, such a severe penalty. The Gemara says, no, we need to be lenient in the beginning. Because otherwise she'll be a chained woman to a dead marriage. So the rabbis were lenient. But they say, we're going to be lenient, but we can't be too lenient because then it'll be pandemonium here. Yeah, so therefore because they were lenient upon her in the beginning, they were so strict at the end, and they make her leave both marriages. Yes, don't bear.
How would Rabbi Zera's distinction of the case fit in with the Chil and Shuma? Like that would, like there are separate issues, but would his backing have any like relevancy also with being strict at the start for Chil and also Shema?
So don't bear here is asking a tremendous question. Rabbi Zera's ruling, that how does it relate to Chelev? So the Chelev case, this is not a case of Iguna. So he's saying that, but Dover is correct. He's pointing out that Rabbi Zera is saying that this case of the woman is not comparable to any other case in Shas. That's basically what Rabbi Zera is saying. It's not all comparable to the case of the Chelev. It's a unique case. And you can't learn from it to other cases because this is the case of where we're very worried about the woman being able to remarry. So we said that if the one witness, she remarried on the basis of the one witness, and then a second husband comes home, the Mishnah said she has to leave both marriages. So the Gemara says, Amarav Roshanu Ela Shenises B'Yed Echad. When do we say she has to leave both marriages? When she remarried on the basis of one witness. But if she remarried on the basis of two witnesses, she doesn't leave. And the Gemara assumes that Rabbi is saying she doesn't leave the second marriage.
So she stays with the second husband and the first?
No. That definitely not with the second and the first.
But what happens to the first? He comes back and
so that's why the Gemara is exactly. Danielle is saying, so what happens to the first guy? So that's why the Gemara says, they laughed at him. They laughed. The Rav said she stays with the second guy, and they start laughing at him in Eretz Yisrael. They start laughing at him. You're staying with us, Gavri, Vikai, Ve'ato Amr, Sloteitze. You're saying that's exactly what Danielle was asking. You're saying the first guy is back here, says, I'm here with my wife, and you're saying don't leave the second marriage. So the Gemara says, no. So what's the scenario? So what's the scenario here is we don't recognize the first guy. The first guy shows up. He says, I'm your husband. And we say, no, you're not. We don't even recognize you. Yeah. Reuven Zachariah has a question.
I don't understand. Like, I get the idea of like being stringent and then lenient at different points in the case, but practically speaking, there is no difference in the specific facts. Like at the end of the day, whether or not I remarry based on the basis of one witness or two witnesses, like both people still exist.
Okay, so the Gemara is going to try to figure out what's the distinction here, and at the end we'll come back to that. The Gemara, that's what the next stuff is going to see, like what's the distinction, exactly that. So first, the Gemara says, no, when does Rav say you stay with the second guy? Only in a scenario where when the first guy reappears, you don't actually recognize him. Presumably, you have to be both, presumably. But where the first guy comes back and we don't recognize him, well, so that's what Rav is talking about here. Presumably, that if she remarried on the basis of two witnesses, she does not have to leave number two. And so the Gemara is saying, well, why don't you have to leave number two? And you could stay with number two. So the Gemara says, well, how can she stay with number two if the first guy's standing in front of you? So the Gemara responds, no, what we're talking about here is two witnesses came where the first guy reappears, but we say we don't know who you are.
Right, but say he doesn't the same, he
So
stays
then-
with number two. He goes back to number one and leaves two.
If he would look the same,
Leave two, go to one.
hold on one second.
If he doesn't.
Hold on one second. If he would look the same, then presumably on the basis of two witnesses, she would leave two, but based upon her Mishnah, leave two and go back to one. Yeah. So,
But we recognize the individual, but he doesn't look the same.
no.
Like,
He comes back, the guy comes back and says, I'm him. I'm husband number one. And we say, no, you're not. So the Gemara says, well, the Gemara says, well, if we don't know who you are, why if there's one witness, why if she remarried on the basis of one witness, do we say that she has to leave the marriage? So the Gemara says, no. What's the scenario here? Two witnesses came and they said, two witnesses come and say, this is him. This is definitely him. We know it's him. You just have no idea who he is. It means say we know it's him. We've been with him the whole time. We've been in, Australia with him, and you guys don't know him. And it's possible because it says Vayakar Yosef as Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. Joseph left without a beard and he came, but when he was there, he had a beard, so they didn't recognize him. So basically, what's going on is the two witnesses came and say, we know it's him. She says it's not him. And under that scenario, no, the two witnesses say, they say the whole time we were with him and this is him when he comes back. So and the woman says, and we say we don't recognize him, and therefore Rav says you don't have to leave the second marriage because we still say it's not him because she remarried on the basis of two witnesses. So the Gemara says, well, trade betrayed in it, but still we have two people who said that witnesses who say it was him. So if that's the case, yeah, Daniel.
Just to clarify, two people go and say your husband's dead, and there's another set of two people that are with the husband that come back.
Right.
So there's four witnesses.
That's exactly what's going on. There's two against two. And so therefore, on that basis, the Gemara assumes that Rav is saying you don't that you rotate it. She doesn't have to leave the second marriage. Because it's not just two against two, it's also we say two and we say that's not him.
Well, yeah. The wife being like
what?
Like DNA.
Okay, for that one, hold on. Let's save that question. Let me just say this. So the Gemara says, but here, still, if it's two against two, the people trade in it, and so that's the case. If there's a question of a doubt, so now the second husband, he's going to on top of 88b, he's going to stay with her and have intercourse with her. Guess what? He should have to bring a carbon asham taloi because he's not. How can he be certain he's not a married woman? The Gemara says, Amar Rav Sheshes, going shenisis le'acham. No, she marries one of the witnesses who's certain that he has died. Right, I know. The Gemara says earlier that if you're a witness, you can't do that. So how this does contradict an earlier Gemara. So, right. But let's deal with that question another time. But the point is that one of the witnesses has testified that that her husband has died, and so therefore he doesn't have a doubt. He's certain that the husband is dead, so therefore he doesn't have to bring this sacrifice. So the Gemara says, well,
what's the difference?
What? No, because an asham taloi is brought only if you bring the sacrifice if you're not sure. But if you're sure, you don't have to bring the sacrifice. Okay. So the Gemara says, well, he gufa b'asham taloi kamen. Well, she's not the witness, so she should have to bring the carbon asham. That maybe she was with a man when she's married to a different man. The Gemara says no. Ba'omeres barili, where she says, I'm certain this is not my husband. Well, the Gemara says, where if she says, I'm certain this is not my husband, what's even the chiddush? I feel Rabbi Nachman bar Rabbi Yossi, even according to Rabbi Nachman bar Rabbi Yossi, we're going to see the Gemara in Subos, he says that if she remarried, if it was 2 against 2, and then she married on the basis of the 2 who gave her the ruling that she can remarry, he said she has to leave the marriage afterwards. The Rabbanan argue with him in Subos and say if she remarried, she could stay. 2 witnesses say she was divorced, 2 say she wasn't divorced, and then she remarried. Rabbi Nachman bar Rabbi Yossi says she has to leave the marriage. So even according to Rabbi Nachman bar Yossi, when does Rabbi Nachman bar Rabbi Yossi say she has to leave? When the witnesses came and then she remarried. But if she remarried and then the witnesses came, well, he wouldn't say it. You had a question, Reuven?
Are you bringing the Asham tell her at the beginning of the relationship or when the first husband shows up?
After each act, before she would do after she would do each act, she'd have to bring it. So the Gemara says, Getanya, what's the case here of Nachum bar Yossi? Shnayim omer mace. 2 witnesses say your husband has died. Ushnayim omer mo mace. And 2 say no, he's alive. Shnayim omer niskash. 2 witnesses say he's divorced you. Shnayim omer mo niskash. 2 say she's not divorced. Hareza rotinasa. She can't remarry. Bimni says, and if she remarries, rotate says she can't. She doesn't leave the relationship. That's the Rabbanan. Whereas Menachem bar Rabbi Yossi says Tate, she leaves the marriage. And Amar Menachem bar Yossi, when do I say that she has to leave the marriage? Amos on the Yomer Tate, excuse me, Bisman Shabo Adim, when the witnesses came. And then she marries. And if the witness, but if she got married and only then do the witnesses come, she doesn't have to leave the marriage. So we see from here. In this case, since she remarried and then the witnesses showed up, even according to Rabbi Nachman bar Yossi, she wouldn't have to leave the marriage. So what's Rav's chiddush when Rav says she doesn't have to leave the second guy? So the Gemara says, no, Rav is talking about a case where first the witnesses came and that said that the first husband is alive, and then she remarried the second guy on the basis of, and then she remarried the second guy. Then she doesn't. So the Gemara says, the witnesses came and then she married, and Rav says she doesn't have to leave the second guy. To prove that Rav does not hold like Rav Nachman bar Yossi, meaning to say, even though she married a second man after 2 witnesses claimed that her first husband was alive, she still would not have to leave the second guy. Yes, Ben. So there.
So how come when she said about like the witnesses, according to Rav, you can believe the second group of witnesses when they come and they say your husband is what's called is dead or he's alive. That's a first group.
According to this Gemara, what Rav is saying, according to this opinion of the Gemara, what Rav is saying is that in a scenario where 2 witnesses came and said your husband died, and then 2 other witnesses came and say your husband is still alive, if she remarried, she would not have to leave the second marriage when the first guy shows up again, and that's because Rav is ruling like Rabbanan, not like Rabbi Nachman bar Yossi, and he's saying the whole point is to rule against Rabbi Nachman bar Yossi. Or Ikadami, alternatively, time of the Nisis V'achach Bo Edom. What's the reason why she doesn't have to leave? Because first she married, and then only then did the second set of witnesses come. Of a Bo Edom.
Second set being the people who are saying she is alive.
He is alive, yeah.
So she first gets remarried?
According to the Ikadami. No. First they say 2 witnesses say he's dead. Then the second set of witnesses come and say, and then she remarries according to this Ikadami. And then a second set of witnesses come. That's when Rav says you don't have to leave. And this is Kaman Menachem bar Rabbi Yossi. That's ruling like Rav is ruling like Rabbi Menachem bar Rabbi Yossi. Only if she says we don't know him. Yeah, we don't know him.
And if you can't recognize people.
Right. So the Gemara says.
So what does she have to gain from recognizing him?
No, if she would know it, right? Well, maybe she likes him, the first guy.
No, she has to leave both.
In this scenario, according to Rav, where there are 2 witnesses who say her husband died, then she remarried, then 2 witnesses come and say the husband is still alive, and the guy shows up and says it's me, Rav would still say she doesn't have to leave the second marriage.
Second?
Yeah, that's what Rav says. Lo Tate say. So the Gemara says, Masav Rava challenges this. We say we're talking about this scenario. It says Minayim Shem Woratza Dafano. How do we know in a circumstance where a person, if a Kohen, for example, doesn't want to, the Rashi says we're talking about a Kohen, if he doesn't want to do the right thing with respect to not becoming ritually impure, or also he doesn't want to separate himself from disqualified women that dafno, that we strike him. How do we know? It says Talmud of Kidashto. We have to sanctify the Kohen Baal Korcho, even against his will. Mara says, hey, dummy, what's the scenario here? If you want to say that we're talking about a case where she didn't marry one of the witnesses, and so therefore we can't be. How can he be sure that she's not his wife? How can he be sure that she's allowed to remarry? And she also doesn't say, "I'm certain that this is not my husband." Why do we have to need a price to tell us that we could strike him? It must be that. What's the scenario of this price? He said, she married one of the witnesses, the Karma Barley, and she says, this is certainly not my husband. The Kotani Defano, and we still strike him to separate it. So we see that unlike Rav, we say we force him to leave the marriage. So the Gemara says, well, that case is different because he's a Kohen. Easter Kahuna Shani. A Kohen is more chashem. A Kohen is such a holy person. He's holier than everybody else. And so therefore we force him to leave the marriage. What does it mean? No, we work harder to get witnesses to prove that she can't stay married to this guy. Or else what we're talking about here is that the witnesses first came and said that the second husband was still alive, and only then did she get married. And we're following the position of Nachum Bar Yossi that we caused the marriage to leave. All this up until now was saying, how do we understand this Gemara according to Rav? It says she can stay with the second guy.
Wait, how does that coincide with the lenient beginning if you have to wait for another set of witnesses?
No, you don't have to wait. We're talking about a circumstance where she did wait before getting remarried. And then Rav Nachum Bar Yossi was saying, since she remarried after the second set of witnesses came, she has to leave it.
Wait, but we just read the Eva, right? It says, my dad and dad. So you're saying you should wait after your first set come and say he's dead. You should wait for another 2 sets to maybe say.
No, we're saying that that's the scenario, not that she should, but that is the scenario.
Oh, that if she does.
Right, exactly.
Oh, but she should be able because we're supposed to be lenient at the start.
Exactly. So she doesn't have to wait along because I'm going to be waiting unending.
It's the same starting leniency with regards to the Kohen. Oh, I'm sorry. The first husband has to be a Kohen. He can't be the second husband. Never mind.
Okay, so Gemara says,
it says here, force him to refrain from initially marrying the woman based on the first 2 witnesses by attempting to find other 2 witnesses.
That's the funnel. We say that's the case if we force him. Where in the case of a Kohen, we're going to try and do extra diligence to find. Before we allow her to marry, we do extra diligence by the case of the Kohen. Rav Ashi gives a totally different answer. Rav Ashi says, "Milo Teitze." When Rav says she doesn't leave, Milo Teitze to come a Rav. No, it doesn't mean that she doesn't leave the second guy. It means Lo Teitze Me Tera Rishon. Means to say she goes back to the first guy. Rav says if she remarried on the basis of 2 witnesses, doesn't mean that she stays with number 2. It means she goes back to number 1 because we say that it wasn't adultery. It says it was like she was assaulted. And so therefore she go back to husband number 1 and she leaves husband number 2. A totally different answer.
But does she get a punishment?
Who? Number 2?
He didn't do anything wrong.
No, he would have to bring a sin offering. Yeah, he'd have to bring a sin offering. Number 2. But number 1, but the wife wouldn't. But the husband number 2 maybe would have to. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know.
Why would he have to?
Because
he was so within his rights.
He did an accidental sin. So the Gemara says.
But she was constituted as a non-married woman, therefore he was able to marry him.
Yeah, but
and then after
right. So I don't know. So we'd have to look to see if it's a chatas or if it's a shogeg or an ones. Well, we could ask Zev. So the Gemara says, in this case, so that's what it's talking about. So the Gemara says, so if that's the case, well, Rav already said that one time. It's not nisei shlober shus muteras lachsa. That it says in the Mishnah that if she married without the ruling of the court, that she's allowed, meaning to say it was such a black letter law, she didn't need a ruling of the court, she could return to the first husband. And Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, Hachi Hochasa. And Rav Huna said in the name of Rav that that's in fact the halacha. So why do we need to say the same ruling twice? So the Gemara says, yeah, the Gemara says indeed they're the same thing, but there are 2 statements that were said together. So now the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel. Shmuel did a different ruling. Shmuel says, Lo Shanu. When do we learn this teaching? When do we learn teaching from our Mishnah that she has to leave the second husband? Lo Shanu El Shalom Mechashto, where she doesn't deny the witness that this is her husband. But if she comes along and she says, actually, this is not my husband, but if she denies the witness that says her husband is still alive, she doesn't have to leave the second husband. So the Gemara says, what are we talking about? What's the scenario where Shmuel gives this wrong? If you want to talk about where two witnesses show up and say your husband is alive, why do we care that she says it's not true? She can't refute two witnesses. So if it's one witness that shows up and says your husband is alive, the only reason why we say she doesn't have to leave the second guy is because she rejected him. But if she's quiet, she'd have to leave him. But why? The Ula taught a principle wherever the Torah believes one witness, then that witness is Arekan Shnayim. Then that one witness is considered to have the effect of two witnesses. And we should never believe one witness who comes to uproot two. Yes,
Does she have to give a shvuah, or is it just statement?
I don't know. Biblically speaking, she doesn't have to give an oath, but maybe rabbis would require her, but it doesn't say.
Because that would change things with regards to like whether or not she actually wants to return to her husband. I mean, it'd be terrible. It's a lie.
It doesn't say that she has to give an oath. So Gemara says, and so what are we talking about here? Why do we say here? What's the reason where we say here that if the woman rejects the witnesses, she doesn't have to leave the relationship? Is we're talking about psui edus, where we're talking about a scenario where the witnesses themselves are generally speaking disqualified, and like a teaching of Rabbi Nechemiah, the Tanya Rabbi Nechemiah Omer, Kol makom she'amina Torah eid echad, wherever the Torah believes one witness, halach acharov deos, we follow majority opinion. Generally speaking, if there's two witnesses, we say two is, we don't care about majority anymore. But if we're believing one witness, then we go by the majority. And if there's two women against one man, we view it as though it's kishnei anashim be'ish echad. We view it as though it's two men against one man. Or alternatively, wherever one witness came, he's initially good. Then we would say even 100 women is like one witness. But here what we're referring to is going to Asya Isha Meikara, that initially speaking it was one woman. With Tarasso to Rabbi Nechemiah and explain Rabbi Nechemiah as follows. Rabbi Nechemiah says, wherever Torah believes one witness, then we found the majority opinion. And look at two women against one woman, and look at two as though there were two men against one man. But if two women against one man, we view them as equal. So I will stop here. If anybody has any questions, I'll stop the recording.